Welcome back. This week's episode of PREM Preview focuses on the bizarre 48-hour entire history of the Super League. We'll also be looking at which fans have the most cause for concern and the most right to be absolutely outraged by these greedy owners' attempts to steal the game of football away from us fans. The farce began on the 18th of April, the 6 big clubs showing no big kahunas, simply releasing Twitter posts stating, "We have joined the Super League." No consultation with fans, no decency, no respect, no prior mention of any of the plans, not even a spokesman. The billionaire cowards just hid behind their one-pager stating the format of the new competition that they would be taking place in at the earliest opportunity. So, what did these brilliant billionaire brains decide would be the best route forward for European football? It began with 12 clubs and 6 of them, half from the Premier League. Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal and Tottenham. Tottenham, who haven't won a single trophy since 2008 and haven't won the league since 1961. Yet they believe that they should have the permanent place amongst the European elite. Before you Spurs fans tune out, there's plenty more ridicule for the rest. Arsenal, Manchester City, Atletico Madrid never won a Champions League. They've never won the top European competition, yet they believe they should be in it every single season from this day forth. The other 6 clubs outside of the Premier League were from La Liga and Serie A. They included Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, Barcelona, Inter Milan, AC Milan and Juventus. Some of these clubs didn't qualify for the Champions League last season, and many of them aren't going to qualify for the Champions League next season. Some of them, like Arsenal, aren't even going to qualify for the Europa League next season. How can that possibly be fair for these clubs to get into the Champions League next season ahead of the likes of Leicester, who've won an FA Cup and finished in the top 4, and yet they are supposed to just miss out and all their achievements is supposed to be for nothing? So, what was the proposed format? It would be these 12 clubs plus another 3 clubs being the 15 founding clubs of the Super League. And that would leave 5 places for additional clubs to qualify based on their domestic achievements. Now, some of you might be thinking that that allows for one of these Leicesters to get through, but there's 40 different nations in Europe, and those nations are supposed to rely on the remaining 5 places. The games would take place midweek, and this would be a replacement of the Champions League. All clubs specified that they did intend to carry on playing in their domestic competitions as well. The biggest point, of course, that got everyone in a hissy fit was the fact that there would be no relegation. Even if these teams were to get relegated, if Tottenham or Arsenal got relegated from the Premier League, they would still take place and take part in the European Super League. How can that possibly be fair? How can that be just? Where is the sporting fair play? Anybody who's played sport at any level grew up on the principle of may the better man win. And when the better man wins, he should be rewarded. Of course, this scenario would probably never even present itself. It wouldn't be able to present itself because these clubs are going to take all the money from the big broadcasting deals from JP Morgan, 3.5 billion euros worth to divide between them to invest in their squads, their infrastructures, which are already far superior to these so-called smaller clubs living within their means, doing their best, battling week in, week out, ending the chances of ever seeing a repeat of what happened with Leicester those few years ago under Ranieri. The announcement was met with absolute uproar from the fans and the pundits alike, all criticizing this greedy attempt to steal the beautiful game. Even the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke out, saying this would be very damaging for football and it would strike at the heart of the domestic game. And considering that these clubs put out the statement saying we are taking place in this competition going forward. It wasn't we're looking into this competition, we're considering our options. No, it was we are taking place. So the fans can be really proud of what happened in the following hours. The Premier League also condemned the action of these clubs, although with the little information that was put out and no prior warning, they chose not to give too much of a statement after that initial release, understandably. So, after being slated by all the pundits across all the media outlets, the fans took to Twitter to voice their concerns as well, and other social media platforms to let them know that they were not going to stand for this and they were going to fight for the beautiful game of football. So, on to the next morning. It appeared we were missing 3 founding clubs from the 15 clubs stated in the release statement. So the media took to asking around to the other clubs that could potentially be considered to take part in the Super League. And it started with the German clubs. Bayern Munich announcing, no, we say no to the Super League. It is not happening. The French clubs followed soon after, the likes of PSG saying that they had no plans to participate in the Super League. Of course, I think after seeing the reaction of the night before, nobody was about to announce that they were also considering joining the Super League, even if they were invited. Just wasn't going to happen. Juventus president Andrea Agnelli and Manchester United vice president Ed Woodward announced that they were stepping down from their roles. I think many Man United fans in hindsight would have been glad for this fluttering existence of the European Super League, if only to get rid of Ed Woodward. So, Mr. Alexander Ceferin, the boss at UEFA, then came out and condemned the Super League, obviously, as this directly put in danger their own competition, threatening deduction of points, banning teams, and even going as far as to threaten players to say that they would be banned internationally from their nations if they chose to take part in the Super League. Everything continued to unravel very quickly with the Super League, with that evening Leeds playing Liverpool, one of the Big Six and Super League clubs, with the Leeds players choosing to wear t-shirts, golding the giant, saying you need to earn your success. But the Liverpool players were in full agreement. They wanted no part in these greedy strategies from their owners. Captain Jordan Henderson took one of the biggest roles in this whole escapade, like one of the Avengers, calling for the captains to assemble and take down these villains. So on to the next day, and it was the Chelsea fans' turn to stand up to their club and their owner. And I think if we're being honest, Chelsea would still be fighting mid-table if it wasn't for Roman Abramovich coming along. So of all the owners, I think he had some of the biggest amount of credit in the bank and the least need for the money for that matter. Still, the fans did come. They stood outside the ground, causing the game with Brighton to be delayed, even stopping the bus of the team from entering the stadium. Club legend Petr Cech coming out himself into the crowd, begging the fans for time to sort this mess out. And it seemed to do the trick. Very shortly after, Chelsea announced that they were preparing documents to withdraw from the Super League. There seemed to be a bit of a scramble after that. Man City then actually putting out a statement saying they had withdrawn from the competition, but that there would be extensive litigation to follow. It seemed to be a bit of a race then. The clubs were desperately trying to be the one that got out the message first, that we were withdrawing, thinking that they could get some kind of good credit back for withdrawing early. That same night, the Super League actually confirmed that it had been suspended, with even the banks, JP Morgan, stating that it would be difficult to continue. And then the owners went through a series of ludicrous apologies, and it was almost a contest to see who could make the worst job of it. I think in the end, John Henry made the biggest fool of himself by making the most sincere apology. For other ones like the Glazers barely seemed to acknowledge that they had made a mistake. Arsenal fans protested before their match, and despite the club's apology for the Super League saying they had made a mistake, the fans were relentless and have continued to this day to call for the Kroenkes to sell the club. Obviously, there was some interest as well from Spotify owner Daniel Ek wanting to buy the club and take it out of the Kroenkes' hands, saying that he was a lifelong fan of the club, and the fans seemed to really back that, with the support from the likes of Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry and Dennis Bergkamp on the panel of this proposed takeover. But the Kroenkes, to the Arsenal fans' dismay, were very quick and decisive in the rejection of the offer, stating, "We don't need the money." Yet they fought to ruin the club and British football with their greedy, money-grabbing strategies. Manchester United fans then went on to make the biggest protest before the Manchester versus Liverpool game, to such an extent that the game actually got called off and rescheduled in an already busy calendar. Even Ole Gunnar Solskjaer went on to say later that protest, which cancelled the game, probably led to them losing the 2 games that followed. That said, with Manchester United already in the Europa League final and already qualified for next season's Champions League through their league position, I think Manchester United fans would be more than happy to have lost those 2 games if it means that the Glaziers finally go. And you better believe, now that the COVID restrictions are being lightened and that fans are being allowed back into the stadium for the remaining games, that they will continue to protest that the Glaziers get the hell out of Manchester United Football Club and the hell out of Manchester. So, where did this all come from? Why a Super League, and why now of all times? One of the biggest reasons, operating profits. These men were hurt where they hurt most, in their pockets. And in the 1920 season, from the beginning of the COVID pandemic, operating profits had declined across all of European football, with just these big 12 clubs totaling losses of 1.2 billion in their operating profits. But this wasn't just to save them from the COVID-19 pandemic. Half of these clubs, especially the Italian clubs and the Spanish clubs, were really leaking money and were already showing operating profits down since 3 years ago. And make no mistake, the timing had nothing to do with COVID-19. The timing was all about the impending announcement the following morning from UEFA of the new Champions League and Europa League format. Now, are these clubs wrong to oppose a new format that they do not like from UEFA? We have to remember, although UEFA is a non-profit organization, they have shown in the past to be corrupt, and make no mistake, these people running UEFA are making a lot of money. The same goes for the FIFA officials we saw with Michel Platini, with Sepp Blatter, the stuff that goes on in these organizations. As much as UEFA have been failing football and FIFA have been failing football for many years, the new proposed formats in particular do seem to really defy belief. When players are already complaining about being overplayed, managers moaning every week about fixture congestion. You had people like Gundogan reacting immediately saying, yes, okay, we've dealt with this European Super League, but now can we deal with the new UEFA Champions League format? Are they trying to kill players? This is what it seems like to these guys. The UEFA Champions League format will also follow a league format now. And although that finally fits the name of the competition, you have to agree, I think everybody who watches football agrees, that the best football in the Champions League comes in the knockout stages. And although there will be a final elimination rounds, it won't be the same with the amount of clubs that could be able to take part in cup football. We've seen what has happened in the Premier League over recent years, since probably Jose Mourinho first came to the Premier League and introduced this pragmatic football style where the big clubs, whenever they play each other, sit back, put the low blocks and just try to hit on the counter or play for draws. They're happy to take a point of these games and try to battle to get maximum points against the lower so-called smaller teams. So I do think the clubs have a right to protest the UEFA new format proposals. But what they proposed as an alternative strategy was far, far worse. And I think they've really learned that lesson now. And I think it'll be a while before they try again. But make no mistake, if these guys are left in charge, if there is nothing changing from a regulation point of view, these greedy billionaire owners will try this again, or at least the ones that succeed them. This is not the end of the Super League. This is only the end of the Super League in name. They will come back in a brand new title. There will be some changes, but the goal will be the same: to monopolize the competition of European football and to hold all the money for themselves. There was particularly a lot of moaning from fans and pundits, assuming that this was due to the American ownership and the American model of sporting competitions. If you go over to the US, you look at the NFL and other sporting competitions, they do have a system of franchises where the big clubs always compete against one another and have no fear or risk of ever being taken out of the big league. Now, although there might be some truth in that, there's a lot of truth in that. What people should know is that this format, this proposal is the brainchild of Florentino Perez, the Real Madrid manager, who is certainly not American. You should also take into account that there was a Russian owner, Mr. Roman Abramovich. There were Saudi owners from Manchester City. And of course, there was even an English owner in Daniel Levy from Tottenham. And all of them were in agreement that this was the best way forward. I think it was more of a fear that they would not be at the big table anymore. If all of the other clubs went, then they would be stranded, having to settle for lower broadcast money from the Premier League, which would no longer contain the big teams and the big fans and the big money. Mr. Perez has obviously come out and said that this is not dead. He's not giving up on it yet, not just yet. Has said that these clubs have a legally binding contract, and he has even written to the European Court of Sport to look into this to see if UEFA is acting correctly or if they are denying competition. Of all the complaints that they can have, that they are claiming that UEFA are stifling competition by not allowing another European competition, despite the fact that in truth, that it is these big clubs that are trying to deny the little man and his little club a chance to play at the big table. So let's move on and delve a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole of ownership in Premier League football. There are actually only 3 Premier League clubs at the moment which are entirely owned by British owners. The others are either exclusively owned by foreign ownership or at least have one foreign owner. We have to be careful of not overreacting in terms of putting the blame at the door of foreign ownership and foreign models of ownership. As we've already mentioned, Daniel Levy is an English owner and made the exact same decision as these foreign owners. Chelsea owe their history to Roman Abramovich. He's bought them success. The same goes for Manchester City. They've relied on their Saudi owners to bring them back to glory. And now they sit comfortably as Premier League champions and in their first Champions League final, where they will face Roman Abramovich's Chelsea. The Glazers, Manchester United, are obviously also sitting comfortably in the Europa League final. So the success of foreign ownership in the British game cannot be denied. Of course, Manchester United fans will claim, and rightly so, that they should be competing in the big Champions League matches and not the Europa League. And you can't help but notice 9 of the 20 Premier League clubs do have American owners. So maybe it's just a battle of time before we're forced to submit to the American model. Alright, so which fans have the biggest right to complain against their ownership? If we have a little bit of a deeper look at the numbers, you'll see that Tottenham Hotspur, owned by British owner Daniel Levy, have spent the least amount of money on transfers. And when taking into account the players which they've sold as well, they also have the lowest net spend of any club of the big six, with only an average of 34.6 million spent per season in the last 5 seasons. Unsurprisingly, Manchester United, Manchester City and Chelsea have spent close to £1 billion each in transfers. But what may surprise you is that Chelsea actually have the second lowest net spend of all the clubs in the big six. So after accounting for the money they've made by selling on players, they've spent an average of £63.4 million per year. Whereas Arsenal, currently sitting mid-table, have spent an average of £72.6 million in the last 5 years after accounting for their sales on transfers. I won't say surprisingly, but quite alarmingly, the Kroenkes have spent zero amount from their own owner financing into the club, with the Glaziers and Daniel Levy actually taking money out of the club, minus 89 million for Manchester United in owner financing. That said, they do have one of the highest net spends per year, with an average of £131 million per year in the last 5 years spent on transfers. So for all those Manchester United fans moaning about not signing Jadon Sancho, Manchester United have been putting their money in their pockets, but it's definitely not coming out of the owners' pockets, that's for sure. Liverpool's owners have actually put in around 75 million over the last 5 years into the club for transfers, with an average of £67.4 million spent per year on transfers after sales. And again, not that I want to give Roman Abramovich too much praise, given that he's actually banned from entering the UK at the moment. He has actually spent 440 million of his own money on transfers for Chelsea in the last 5 years. So, where does Premier League ownership go from here? Well, to start with, there's been an online petition from fans reaching 100,000 signatures, which will mean the UK Parliament will have to discuss further the implementation of regulatory bodies in football or possible fan ownership going forward. This is a very successful model, obviously, from Germany, which has become very popular in the minds of British fans, with the Bundesliga operating a 50+1 share ownership model, which means that the club or members of the club, so the fan supporters, actually own a majority shareholding within the company, within the football club, foremost. What some of you might not know is that actually there are 2 exceptions to this rule. Both Wolfsburg, who are owned by Volkswagen entirely, and Bayer Leverkusen, who are owned by Bayer, a German biotech company. And this is because they actually started as business sporting clubs. So, we'll have to see where this goes from here. We know, like us, you'll be listening with very eager ears to how this develops, whether this will go through Parliament and really get the scrutiny that it deserves. Maybe in a year or two, we'll be very thankful for this little farcical episode in British football history, and that it will essentially secure the future for British fan ownership of their own football clubs. That's it for another episode of Prem Preview. Hopefully things will return to normal next season and we'll all be able to go back and enjoy and support our clubs instead of just protesting outside the grounds. That's it from me, Tank, and the Dawg Show. We hope you're enjoying our Off the Leash content, and we'll be back next season bigger and better. Peace out.